My name is Lee McCoy, and for this assignment, I've chosen to choose a Celtic woman as a role model for women and men in our contemporary world. I'm going to explain the reasons why I think her life addresses these contemporary issues. Now, when I originally read this question, I immediately thought of Nagle. I do believe she's a Celtic woman for our time. My grandmother, Mabel Nagle, was a descendant of Nano's brother, David. So I grew up with stories of Nano Nagle, her contribution, her life, the stories about her. It was instilled in me quite early to have quite a reverence and a respect for Nano's philosophy. So I'd like to share some of those with you. I've created a word cloud here that is going to touch on some of the things that I'm going to discuss in this assignment. She was a nun, an abbess, a daughter, a teacher. She was known as Lady of the Lantern. We're going to be discussing some of those. First of all, though, I want to start with a timeline to sort of set the context. Nano was born Honora Nagle, and it's important to establish that the penal legislation had been enacted in Ireland prior to Nano's birth. So this was in 1695, that severely limited the lives of Catholics. We'll talk a moment about its effect on Nano. She was born in Ballygriffin, County Cork, in 1718, when penal legislation was sort of in full bloom, and this affected her ability to be educated. Nano attended what was called hedge schools, small, informal, home-based education. But by the time she was a teenager, her parents wanted her to have something more formal, more rigid. So she moved to France to live with some family friends, where she was able to continue her education. And upon graduation, she enjoyed her life in France so much, she decided she was going to stay for a while. She and her sister Anne were there together, and they attended lots of parties and had a very robust social life. But one morning, early one morning, after an all-night party, they encountered some poor people waiting outside of a church to get in to have food, and that opened Nano's eyes. She hadn't really seen that side of life in France up until that point. So that was life-changing for her. Upon her father's death in 1746, at age 28, she returned to Dublin. She and Anne returned together. Now, Anne had already a sense of a burning desire to sort of remediate some of the social justice issues, and she had a profound effect on Nano as well, and was already helping to feed the poor. Nano decided that she wanted to educate poor Catholic children, so she started going out, as this was penal times were still in effect, so she would go out at night to educate these children. So she became known as Lady of the Lantern. Eventually, an inheritance she received from an uncle allowed her to open her first school on Cove Lane in Cork City in 1754. She went on then to open 7 more schools. By the time she was in her 50s, her health was not good. So she thought, was trying to figure out a way that her work could continue after her death. So she founded a religious order, the Presentation Sisters of the Blessed Virgin Mary, in December of 1775. And she lived for another 9 years and died in April of 1784. One interesting tidbit here, when I was researching her, I'd never heard of this. In 2005, a radio show polled its listeners to find Ireland's greatest woman. At the very top of the list, Nano Nagle. Very interesting. Even above St. Bridget. Just a little interesting tidbit. I think Nano's legacy for our time can be summed up in terms of 6 roles that I think she had throughout her life and continues to have. One as an educator, as an abbess, as a social justice advocate, as a mystic, as an Anam Cara, and as an intercessor. So I want to look at each of these 6 roles individually. As an educator, no doubt this is one of Nano's most profound and very widespread influences in contemporary life. She opened 7 schools in her time, but to this day there are still schools that bear her name and are faithful to her philosophies. In Limerick, in Dublin, in Killarney, even in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the Philippines, Listowel, Ireland. And there are so many others that, while they don't necessarily bear her name, are faithful to her philosophies and mention her in their history. She was also an abbess, of course, as we said. She was she opened the Presentation Sisters. She was the foundress of the Presentation Sisters. So there are still a tremendous footprint to this day. Nano's global footprint now extends to 26 countries. And her sisters are not just teachers, they're nurses, they're counselors, they're involved in spirituality work, involved in policy, and involved in social justice. So she really has a very broad global footprint that continues to this day. She's also a social justice advocate. In her own life, she was motivated by the injustice that she saw, the lack of opportunity for Catholics in her country. But even to this day, that social justice motivation continues. On her birthplace in Ballygriffin resides the Nagle Center, which has a focus on spirituality center, focuses on heritage, Irish heritage, as well as the heritage of Nagle's family, and it focuses on ecology. I spent some time there last August, in August of 15. I just want to share a few pictures. That's the entranceway to the Nagle Center. Down there, a bust of Nagle as you walk in. Very beautiful center that is open to various workshops and retreats addressing so many social justice issues. There's a 2-kilometer cosmic walk that traces not only Nano's life, but also the origin of the world and how our need to demonstrate such reverence to the world. There's a bust statue there of a bronze statue of Nano as the Lady of the Lantern. The Nagle Center sits on the banks of the Blackwater River, which is an important part of Nano. She was very much interested in nature, and that plays an important part in the Nagle Center. Nano's quote here, I think, sums up her focus on social justice. We are called to be midwives of a spirituality of peace, justice, and integrity of creation. I think that's her legacy in terms of social justice for us. She was a mystic being somebody that has a personal relationship with God. She was able to listen to that still small voice inside and step out in faith. She has a well-developed sense of what I call audio inspiratio, inspired listening. She was able to listen for God's commands, God's gentle urgings, and then step out. In the textbook for this course, I found that St. Gobnet was very much the same. The quote in the book that says that refers to Gobnet as one who listened to God's message and then steadfastly pursued God's instruction. I think that Nano is very similar to that. She was willing to break the rules to fulfill God's earning. She was truly a mystic, and I think is a model for us in that sense. She's an anamkara, of course, a spiritual friend to people in her own time. She chose the 4 founding sisters, and in the orders that she started, she was certainly a spiritual friend, a spiritual director, a motivator, a confessor for the people, for the nuns, the vowed religious, and she continues to be, but also for those that are lay associates. She has an organization called the Friends of Nano. And they have 3 core values: partnership with the divine, passion for the poorest, and covenant with creation. This is a way that I think her philosophies, her beliefs are still inspiring people today. And finally, she's an intercessor in our family. We've always prayed to Nano. We've always asked for her intercession on various prayers, but so have lots of other people. And Nano is on the road to becoming a saint. In 1994, she was declared a servant of God, which is the first step towards sainthood. That's when somebody is put forward as having a possible path to sainthood. In October of 2013, she was declared venerable by Pope Francis when it was determined that she lived a life of good deeds and her life possibly might lead her towards sainthood. Once there is one miracle attributed to her, she'll be declared blessed. And after a second miracle, she will be declared a saint. So I think that she certainly performs a role for us today as somebody who can intercede on our behalf. This is a picture of a beautiful stained glass icon that resides in the Nagle Center in Ballygriffin, created by Desmond Kine, an Irish artist. And I just want to explain a couple of the points here. The spiral above Nano's head is symbolic of sort of the Celtic symbol of eternity, symbolizing her eternal love of God. The crucified hand of Christ symbolizes protection over top of her. The wings on either side symbolize the Holy Spirit and how the Holy Spirit has moved Nano forward. The Sacred Heart of Jesus within her, her burning love of God. On either side, below her hands, the Blackwater River, symbolized there, symbolizing her hospitality being a key feature of Celtic spirituality and her focus on family and history and ecology. On the left-hand side of the icon, a little bit hard to see, but these are a number of gloomy images of Ireland meant to depict how difficult the penal times were for Catholics living during that time. At the very bottom, we have the children. The children are at the essence of Nano's vocation, her desire to right some of the wrongs and to educate the children who were unable to receive education. At the top right, we have the Blessed Virgin. Nano had a particular devotion to the Blessed Virgin. As well, we see the 4 founding sisters, started the presentation sisters. And at the bottom there, not that clear, but it's an acorn, meant to symbolize the small acorn at the beginning of the formation of the presentation sisters, now grown into a much larger organization that Nano could never have imagined. Although it wasn't really my intention when I started, I was motivated throughout my research to jot down some ideas that I've put into a prayer to Nano, woman for all time. Lady of the Lantern, light for the poor, model of courage, bless us. Wise woman of Ireland, seeker of justice, mystic and visionary, lead us. Teach us to listen in silence, to respond in courage, to fight for justice. Inspire us to see the need, to do what we can, to step out in faith. Amen. So to summarize, I think that Nano's legacy for our time is she encourages us to bless, to lead, to teach, and to inspire. I think that her life definitely makes her a woman for all time. So I thank you very much for listening to my reflections on Nano Nagle. I have included a reference list here, but will also include that separately. Thank you very much.